I have decided to run trauma content over 2 weeks. So if you were looking to next week's dojo and you saw it was the same thing, I'm actually giving us 2 weeks to get through all of this content. I will be working with you today, obviously, because I'm here. And then next week, I am bringing in my friend Jacob, who I'll talk about a bit later, because he has been working with a woman called Judith, who was one of Peter Levine's mentors. So she's been in the field of trauma for a very long time. And I'm just interested and excited to bring him in to see what perspective he has. I've let him know that we're going through all of this. And my hope is that he gives you his perspective and a little bit of what he's learning from Judith, as well as some different ways to actually implement tools and techniques for trauma, especially online. So far, I gave you 6 intro videos about trauma. So there was the Lisa Feldman-Barrett. They're just little videos, right? I think I gave you an insight from Tara Brooke. I gave you a little bit by Vessel van der Kolk. So just a couple of different introduction videos to let you see it from a different perspective, starting to put all the dots together, because this is not new content or different content from what we've been going through. It is an extension. So we're going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper each week. I have given you Waking the Tiger. This will be the most time-consuming thing you go through, I'm guessing. I want you to completely listen to that book from beginning to end before the end of this trauma segment. So you've got this week, next week, hopefully finish it by next week. If not, you can do it the week after that. But I want you to go through Waking the Tiger from beginning to end, because it is really the foundational text for somatic therapy right now, because Peter Levine has really led that movement, and there's a lot of people now branching off that. But you want to know what he's saying. In this field, if you want to be a transformational facilitator, you've got to know what the majority, the field is talking about. And now that I've gone through that book again, after going through the Kybalion, after going through Lisa's work, he's quoting the Kybalion. I don't know if you got that far, but he's actually using the Kybalion and the laws within the Kybalion to create his processes, which is really interesting. So now that I've gone through it again, I'm like, he's on track. He's really on track with how he's sharing this. I gave you the trauma content from the Earth game. Slowly, as you keep learning, especially through this round of SPY, you may see that some of the things that I've said in the past could be articulated better. There's still some great truth in there, but if you listen to me again, you're going to realize that every round I'm going to redefine and get better at what I do. So if you listen to that content, just listen to it with a grain of salt. Listen to it with your new level of understanding. Take what makes sense, look through the cracks. There are certain things that I've learned just in the last month or 2 months that I haven't taught before. So it's still good content. I still want you to have access to it, but listen with an expanded awareness. I've given you the 10-step trauma healing process this week to go through. I've put an asterisk here because we're going to use pieces of it, but I'm going to give you something else at the end of this class to practice. I've given you 2 past dojos, similar to the trauma content from the Earth game. They're now 2.5 years old, but there's some great stuff in there, and I don't necessarily want to repeat it. So please watch it, take the wisdom out of it. I think you're in one of those, Jawei. Take the wisdom out of it, because I answer a lot of questions. And once you have the map that we're going to go through today, you'll be able to take stuff out of those classes and see where it fits in this big picture. And you've got SIBAM. Everyone always loves SIBAM. We brought in Kyra to take people through a SIBAM process, and people love that. So you've got that as well. Okay. Ready to launch off? Here we go. Firstly, I need to add something to last week's class, which is going to be very obvious when you see this next slide. Last week, we talked about the different types of intelligence, and I went through the IQ, EQ, CQ, and SQ, and guess what we didn't add in there? Kinetic intelligence, somatic intelligence, body intelligence. So I've been really lucky. I've had a really beautiful friend here with me for the last few days. Some of you know her, Gaia Ma, who has been in the field of transformation for a long time. She looked at this and she's like, this is great. Where's the body intelligence? And I was like, shit, you're right. So we're going to add kinetic intelligence, which is great for this week. So I'll just start with that. And I also want to introduce a new way of talking about this journey of expanded consciousness. Just think about how challenging the language is in the field. It's really hard to talk about this journey without alienating people and talking about it in a hierarchical way, higher levels of consciousness, lower levels of consciousness, more aware, more blah, 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 blah. And again, I got into a really beautiful conversation with Gaia, and we came out and said, why don't we just call it understanding? That's what we're doing. We're expanding our understanding just to get out of some of this spiritual woo-woo that alienates and separates people. So I'm going to attempt to change my language around this, because we're in a journey of changing stories and language, and say that we're on a journey to expand our understanding. And I think this is really beautiful, and I'll tell you why. Because when we say expansion of consciousness, at this point in time, it doesn't necessarily include care. You know, you can expand your awareness, but if you're not connected to the heart, which we talked about, if you're just the I without the me, then we can become awakened assholes. And I think understanding somehow brings the whole lot together. So through nurturing our intelligence in different ways, we expand our understanding of ourselves, of others. And so I think that's a very nice term that I'm going to start to use when I say, okay, what we're doing here is we're increasing understanding. That will give you more colors to draw from within your palette of colors. So quickly, let's have a look at what KQ is. Similar to last week, I just wanted to add this one here. So I'm calling it K. If we call it S, we've already got an S, so we can't call it somatic. So K, so kinetic quotient, also known as, I'm going to call it somatic intelligence, is a measure of a person's bodily intelligence, which quantifies their ability to understand and utilize the wisdom of the body for movement, balance, and healing. In the field of somatic experiencing, somatic intelligence is crucial for resolving trauma by tapping into the body's innate ability to process and resolve trapped energy associated with high energy states such as hyperarousal, which we talk about a lot. Somatic intelligence encompasses several key aspects. We have body awareness, so the capacity to attune to the bodily sensations and signals, understanding where tension, discomfort, or energy is stored within the body. We have proprioception, which is the sense of the relative position of our body and parts in space, and strength of effort being employed in movement, crucial for coordination, navigating physical action. So proprioception, the back of our brain, the hindbrain is really, it's involved in proprioception. It's not usually a conscious thing, but it's understanding and it's speaking to the inner ear, which is really, really interesting. The inner ear is the aspect of the nervous system that actually communicates to the back of the brain. Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we turning? Are we here? Are we there? Inner ear is very, very interesting to study as well. So the ear as an overall sensory apparatus is fascinating. It's not just for sound, it's also for balance, turning, up and down motion. Embodied presence, the ability to be fully present in the body, experiencing and acknowledging physical sensations without judgment, pretty similar to bodily awareness actually. Spontaneous movement, allowing the body to move instinctively and naturally, facilitating the release of trapped energy and completing the trauma response cycle without conscious control or interference from the mind. So obviously you can see that this is something that you can see by reading this, that the body intelligence and the mind intelligence, the IQ, are very interwoven, because if the IQ overrides the body intelligence is going to be suppressed. So we are the only animal that has an IQ or a mind that can suppress the body's innate healing journey. So this is not just about waking the body intelligence, it's about working with the body mind together. Emotional regulation, which I'm just going to leave for a minute because that could also be in EQ, and expressive movement. So using the physical body to convey emotions and process experience, such as through dance, somatic therapies, and other forms of movement that encourages the body's natural healing processes. So that would also include coordination and dexterity. So all of these little bits and pieces can fit into body intelligence. So there we go. That's just adding on to last week, and it's a good introduction to this week in which we're talking about trauma. So now we've got to go through our diagram so that you can understand trauma at a higher level. So you're going to recognize these diagrams, but I'm adding pieces every week here. So with trauma, the main thing is that the energy coming in, the data coming in, is increased. That's the way I want you to think about this. We have more energy data coming in than in the normal waking time, normal waking life. So increased energy or data coming into the system is going to go through the peripheral nervous system into the central nervous system. It's going to increase the amount of sensorial data in the brain, right? So now I'm just showing the same diagram. It's just more information went in, and it goes in fast. I'm going to add some pieces here. So here's what happens in the affect. Vanessa, I'll come back to you in a second. Okay. So here's what happens with the affect. More data goes in, and what we start to do is we start to move towards what Peter Levine calls hyperarousal. So more data goes in, the body, firstly, it's very quick how this happens. The body may perceive a threat, but there's a way in this which this happens. So I'm going to try and get into the details here so that you can understand how the nervous system body is working. But let's say more data starts going in, and it starts moving us towards hyperarousal. When hyperarousal kicks in, the body drops a bunch of adrenaline. That happens at the same time. So that's part of hyperarousal. The body says, okay, we're going to potentially meet some sort of threat or danger. Let's turn on the sympathetic nervous system, flood the system with adrenaline. And you guys know a little bit about how that works. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine, norepinephrine is going to bind to different cell receptors in the body and cause the body to go into a completely different state. We're going to start shunting blood to muscles. We're going to move blood from the prefrontal cortex to the back of the brain. We're going to shut off digestive processes. We're going to turn off the immune system, and we're going to go into the adrenal system so that we can fight or run. All right, so this is the basic stuff. Now, if that hyperarousal and the drop of adrenaline does turn into the fight-flight response, and there is an appropriate fight-flight response, what we'll see happen is that we will go into a movement-based response, and then we'll process it. So this is the natural system. But the thing with trauma is that sometimes this doesn't happen. We go into hyperarousal, and we can't fight, and we can't run. And so the next stage of this is if you instantaneously cannot mobilize that energy, the body starts to constrict itself. It happens very fast. And Vita Levine talks about this and gives you these little scenarios that you can imagine. So I think this one was a really good one. Imagining that you're sitting on a plane, you're strapped in and there's been turbulence, and all of a sudden you hear the engines go off. So the engines go off and the body goes into a hyperarousal state quickly, right? Poof, like, uh-oh, there's a problem. But you can't fight and you can't run because you're strapped into the airplane, which I think is a great example for this. So you can't process that energy. And so if you actually pay attention to how the body reacts, it can get hyperaroused and then it will start to constrict. So you'll feel this constriction in the body. Interestingly, the constriction, if the first flight and fight response doesn't work, can start to bring about feelings of anger, rage, fear, and terror. I'm going to show you exactly how and why in a second. And the reason that happens is because that anger, rage, fear, and terror can kind of push the hyperarousal up, hoping that it can push us into the fight or flight response. So we actually need to mobilize that energy as like a second wave to push into the fight or flight response. But if you can't use the anger or the rage or the terror to actually mobilize the system, now, let's say this doesn't work, now we go into helplessness. So then this is the third wave of it. So we go hyperarousal, we try and mobilize. If we can't mobilize, the emotions start kicking in. Fear, rage, anger, terror, huge amount of energy. If we can't mobilize, we drop into helplessness. Helplessness is a precursor to the freeze response. So this is where the system goes, don't know what to do, freeze. As a final ditch attempt to, and I love the more shamanic view of this, the spirit leaves the body. It freezes the body because it goes, I can't be in whatever this is. This could be too painful. We don't know what to do. So we're going to suspend the spirit. I just love that as an idea. So this in Chinese medicine is called the escaping of the Shen. So the Shen leaves the body. In shamanic practices, the soul leaves the body. So now we are disconnected. So we go into a freeze response. The system was too overwhelmed to complete the fight or flight response. So it went into a state of helplessness and froze. And of course, once you get stuck in the freeze response, we start having short-term symptoms that kick in from that. And then we have long-term symptoms if we can't process the frozen energy. Good start? Good start. Now, I want to talk about, actually coming back here, so we can, again, so now I'm going to talk about this piece over here. So let's now dive in a little bit deeper into what happens through this journey. So when our nervous system prepares us to meet danger, as I said, it's going to shift into this highly energized state. If we discharge the energy, so if we go into this hyperarousal state and we discharge the energy while actively and effectively protecting ourselves or defending against a threat to one of our basic needs not being met, the nervous system will move back towards a normal level of functionality. This comes straight from Waking the Tiger. The felt sense will feel complete, self-satisfied, and heroic. So the reason I put this little diagram in here, because I want you to see that you kind of go up to peak arousal and we want to move through it and come back down. So this would be like parasympathetic nervous system. We're going to move up and then we're going to move through and we're going to come back down. If we aren't able to meet a threat successfully, processing the energy through the fight or flight response and then bring the experience to completion, then the experience gets stuck in the nervous system. So where this little cross is, I want you to imagine we're stuck there. The nervous system then holds the memory of the incomplete process. This is where Lisa Feldman-Barrett's work comes in. She says it's in the nervous system, not specifically the body. So it gets stuck in the nervous system. The body is a mirror of that, but it's in the nervous system, which gets stored in the nervous system. This goes on to create a self-perpetuating dilemma, because on a physiological level, the body and the mind work in tandem as one integrated system. So we get stuck in a negative or a trauma feedback loop. This means that in the future, any data that enters the system that resembles the initial experience can result in the perception of a threat and therefore trigger a behavioral response. Now, we're going to look at that in more detail as well. So going back here. So how do we create traumatic memories? Because we have these traumatic experiences, but that then gets stored in our nervous system. So let's have a look at how we do this. So there's two types of memories. This was the second final chapter of Waking the Tiger. It's actually brilliant. So if you didn't get that far, make sure you get that far. And so he defines that we've got two different types of memory. We've got explicit conscious memory. This is like a video camera. It records events in a sequential order. These memories will help you remember what you did during the day. So if somebody said, tell me about your day, you're like, I woke up and then I went to the bathroom and then I went and opened the fridge and I got my breakfast. This is that type of memory. But then we have these implicit unconscious memories, and this is organization of data. This is organization of significant events. Now, this is a lot what Lisa Feldman-Barrett's talking about in the categorization of experience. This is fascinatingly interesting. So we're going to spend all our time talking about implicit unconscious memories and how we categorize them. It's going to get a little bit intense on the slide here. Before I get into this, Vanessa, did you want to ask your question now?
Sure. Hi. So I was curious to know what you were describing. Is that the moment where trauma happens, or does it work for a traumatized person always like that?
I'm talking about the first traumatic experience. So I'm trying to show like, okay, this will be the first one, but then it gets stuck in the system and then it repeats.
Okay.
Hopefully what I show over the next handful of slides will answer those questions. I've tried to do this as both in depth and simply as possible. So this is my attempt at the most simple diagram to explain all of that. So yeah, we're talking about the first time we have an experience at that level. Actually, let me go through the next slides and see if this answers your questions. So what I'm showing you here is, this is the valence versus arousal chart, right? So over here, come down to our diagram. I've got it over here so you can see it. This little chart, the valence versus arousal. So during the learning phase of life, the learning phase of trauma, what's happening is that you are attempting to categorize and organize information into your nervous system. That's what the nervous system is doing very rapidly. So data comes in and we're trying to categorize and put it into certain areas of the brain. It is based, okay, this is very, 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 very critical to understanding memory. When we categorize things, I want you to understand that we're categorizing based on level of activation. This is actually very interesting. So it's not that we're categorizing based on, oh, here's all the things that are blue, or here's all the things that are houses, although that's a particular type of category. There are imagery, there is imagery involved with categorization, but the brain doesn't categorize based on images as much as it categorizes based on activation, because it wants to understand, and it's this here that it's categorizing. It wants to understand, okay, is this a highly arousing event? And was it unpleasant or pleasant? Okay, we had a 5 on the arousal scale and a 5 on the valence scale. This was the experience that we ended up having that we labeled eventually as frustrated. So it will categorize frustration. And then it will say, this is what it felt like. This was the scenario. This is how you reacted. This was the response. This was the feedback. And so this is what it's categorizing based on. The activation, the emotion that ends up being a part of it, which is something you define later, but then you put it in the category. And then the prediction you made because of that, and the response. The response is then had, and then the nervous system goes and checks it and says, okay, was that response a good response or not a good response? Can we do something different? So this here is really how the nervous system begins to categorize. And then we add our perception on top of it later. So you're storing all this information so that you can use it in the future for both survival and growth reasons. You're a scientist. You're walking through the world and you're taking in data and you're categorizing it so you can pull from those shelves later and go, cool, can I use this for something in the future? This is how we learn. So this is learning and memory together. So the way that it's great to hold this in your mind, it's a really brilliant image, is to think of your nervous system like a multi-story library. So you're going to imagine that there's all these levels in the nervous system. Again, Peter Levine talks about this. So I'm now talking about this interoception, but I'm bringing in the library metaphor right here, because I've said that there's these different areas of the brain that are storing information, but we've never gone into it. I just said it's in there. So now I'm saying, let's just bring that into the vision of a library. And we're going to specifically start to look at the categorization of this type of information. We're looking at high arousal, unpleasant information. So we're now in this quarter of the diagram, and we're going to talk about how we categorize this unpleasant, highly arousal information in the brain. Because remember, one of the brain's jobs is to make sure we can survive. So it's very important how we categorize this information because we need it for our survival. So here we go. Here's our library. So imagine this. You've had the experience marked to the left over here. Okay, this is how I'm saying it. I've put some books in here. So imagine that you've already had these experiences. So you've been learning for some time and you've had, slightly negative, unpleasant experiences, and you've put a book in there and you've said, I've had this experience, this is what happened, and you've got some information. And you've had, slightly more arousing experiences and slightly negative, but these are the experiences that you've had and they're categorized. So can you understand this? Here you've had some experiences and here's the data on it. Everywhere there is not a book, there's no data yet. We haven't gone there yet. So we're in the learning phase. So let's say that one day you're a child and you find yourself in a situation where your nervous system experiences a 7 out of 10 activation and a 7 out of 10 valence here. So all of a sudden, I don't know, you're in a crash or sexual abuse or violence or car crash. Okay? So what happens is that within a fraction of a second, your nervous system starts to go to this library and it starts searching through the library and saying, is there information similar to this in the past? Do we have any data we can pull on and say, okay, we felt this before and this is how we responded, so that we can come up with a prediction about it and make a hopefully intelligent idea about how to respond to this situation. So it's trying to compare past experience to future experience. Now just think about this. If you had never had an experience of being in a car crash before, all that data is going to be new and the body's got to figure out what the hell am I going to do? But imagine you're somebody who, I'm going to make a very contrasting example. Imagine that you are a stunt driver and you've been in 100 car crashes before. So every time, if you're new in a car crash and you don't have that data and you go into that experience, the body's going to not know what to do. But if you're a stunt driver who's navigated 100 different car crashes and different types of accidents, then immediately your brain's going to go, been here, done that, do this, done, no worries. So can you see the difference there? So now we're looking at having an experience where you don't have any data yet. This is learning. This is the process. The body becomes aroused. The nervous system specifically becomes aroused. It goes searching immediately in the library of your brain. If there is data there, it will select that book, it will open it up, it will read it very fast and say, great, this is how we're going to act, and then we complete the movement. So it's looking for data. Now, in trauma, if the nervous system can't find any stored information or data about what to do, it can't select an active response. I'll come back to you in a second, Joey. Now, this is where I said before, those feelings of fear and anger and rage and terror and hopelessness begin to kick in. So whilst you're looking at the diagram, you can kind of close your eyes and think about this. So imagine you find yourself in a hyperaroused situation and your body, even below your level of awareness, goes searching for data. Have I felt this before? Do I have information about how to respond? And you can't find an answer. The body starts to panic. That panic starts to trigger in those feelings. Now, before we've labeled them as anger and rage, so I'm not talking about the labeled, like raw anger, raw terror. So that energy kicks in. Now, what's happening, this is extremely interesting, is that energy kicks in because it's trying to push us up the hyperarousal scale, wondering, is there information at a higher level? Maybe we've got some data at a higher level. So the nervous system, the more aroused you become, the more it searches for data at that level. So it goes searching. So you increase the hyperarousal to go and see if you can find information. Imagine this. You have to run around that library and find a solution, but you can't find anything on the shelf at this level. So you're like, fuck, you have to go to the next level. Searching. There's no books there. Quick, go to the next level. So you're starting to frantically search your library for data. And it actually begins to escalate the anger, rage, terror, and hopelessness, because that will escalate. The hyperarousal will go up. You can't find any data. The fear and the terror will increase. The hyperarousal goes up. And so you go into this. You go into what they call a trauma vortex. That's how he's answering it, calling this situation. So you just continuously go into a spiral. So you increase the arousal valence of the system and it follows the purple. So then you go here and then you go here. Now the system does this because now it's frantically searching for data, as I said, at higher levels of activation, hoping it will come across a book with information about how to respond. This is what causes a negative feedback loop towards overwhelm. So we haven't quite hit overwhelm yet. We're getting there. Now, if we hit overwhelm and there's no information there, eventually the nervous system says, we can't keep doing this, freeze. So if it can't figure out how to cope with the incoming data, it goes overwhelm, freeze. And so it goes overwhelm into hopelessness, freeze response. This is how we're getting stuck in hyperarousal. We get stuck right here. And we actually put a little mark here in our nervous system and say, we've been here before, but we haven't actually got an active coping mechanism for it. The only coping mechanism we know is freeze. So every time we start to get towards this again, unless we can actually renegotiate and learn, we will freeze again every time we hit this point. Now, I've got quite a lot to get through and I know hands are going up here. So how about we hold the questions until I kind of finish this segment, just to make sure I don't answer them, and then I'll come back to the questions, but I do see your hands coming up here. So just keep your questions there. So let's now bring this back down here, because this is how those initial experiences become our memories. I'm trying to show that we go from experience to memory. So now we've started recording data in the nervous system. We have some experiences that we've had that have responses, and we have an understanding of this is what this data is, this is how we've responded in the past, it was good, it was bad, blah, blah, blah. But we also have a couple of experiences, well, these experiences in the nervous system that haven't been completed. And so they have information about, we just got frozen here, they're incomplete. But we don't have active responses for them yet. That gets stored in the nervous system. Next thing I'm going to talk about briefly is that memories, interestingly, especially these, what did I call them? What was the name for it? Implicit memories are a mixed bag of perception. They're stored within these complex multimodal brain regions, which is a metaphorical library. Implicit memories are not real accounts of events, just a melding of fragmented experiences and categorized based on their level of arousal, valence, and response. So when memory comes in, especially traumatic memory, the brain actually grabs that memory and disintegrates it and categorizes it all over the place. So we might have fragments of memory, but it's more metaphorical images. And so they've actually realized that the way this type of memory works is that it's not an account of events. It is metaphorical imagery that matches the level of arousal. And the idea is that memory can give you access to the arousal, but it's not about an actual real event, which is very interesting. And the way that the nervous system does this is the higher aroused you become, the more vivid the memory is. But it's not necessarily a real account visually of what happened. It is often metaphorical. And you can draw data from all over the place to be able to make that memory. So for instance, again, if you listen to the book, you'll hear all of this. If you were raped, maybe you have, this is actually a real story, right? Maybe you have the image of a certain face, but the face was of a character from a movie who was also like a villain, because you had a particular experience with your rapist that matches the feeling you felt when you were watching that particular movie with that particular character. And so they match that face with that hyperarousal so that you have like a category of experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. So memories are very interesting. And Peter Levine says we've got to get out of this idea that memories are real or trying to search for the real memory. The memory, especially the visual memory, the only use for it is that it gives us access to the energy. And I've said this before, we're only ever going to use a memory to access the felt sense in the body. And we can use that memory, but you've all got to hold on to you've got to remember for your clients and yourself, the memories may not be real, but it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter because it's not the point. And if we get stuck in this, there's an ego trap here, because we sometimes like to hold on to the memories so that we can, blame somebody else, or that we can be the hero of our memories. But we've got to let it go. We've got to let go of the realness of the memory. The experience was real. The memory very likely was not. All right. So then, Vanessa, to your question, the second time around, let's say in the future, after we've had the original trauma, we find ourselves in another situation where the data coming in causes us to move towards hyperarousal again. The same thing will happen. But this time, like I mentioned, as we start to get towards hyperarousal, the brain will start searching. It will move through this little library and it will come up this square, this part of the diagram where it's looking and it goes, we've been here before. It was a trauma response. It was there's no data on how we resolved it, and it may take us into freeze again. So as we start to move back towards this hyperarousal state, all sorts of protective mechanisms kick in. And depending on how hyperaroused we become, we have whole layers of different protection mechanisms getting fast as we go closer and closer to the peak experience. So this is where, okay, let's say we're moving towards this original hyperarousal experience and it activates the past memory of the trauma. Then the diagram moves on the way that we've learned it before. The brain then predicts a threat. So now we move into prediction. This threat then triggers off survival strategies. So I've now got our protector cells here. We'll talk way more about the protector again when we get to parts work, but this is part of it. So these survival strategies are protective mechanisms. So our protector cells kick in. The freeze response or the dissociation is one of our protector cells. We can just think of it like that. Maybe we've got a whole lot of them, but if we get too hyperaroused, the freeze protector may come in and go, system shut down. Behaviors that increase the likelihood of escape and survival. That's really what a protector self is designed to do. They're attempting to increase our likelihood of escape and survival by getting our needs met. Firstly, especially with trauma, safety kind of comes first. And then over time, depending on different level of hyperarousal, different protective responses. So far, so good. And then it feeds back into the system. So then now we're learning. And we start to go, think about this, if we actually go back into the trauma response that we didn't complete and we complete it, we then complete the learning loop and we get to put the data in there and say, we've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, actually resolved it. If we don't complete it, then the system keeps going around and saying, nope, haven't sorted it yet. Nope, haven't sorted it yet. Nope, haven't sorted it yet. And we will keep going through it until the nervous system solves the problem, completes the movement. All right, let's have a look at some of these survival strategies again. I've talked about this before, but let me say it again. So this is the effect. We make a prediction. Prediction sets into motion our biology. That triggers off our survival cells. And the effect, interestingly, is that we will continuously, I am so enjoying being a nerd in this area because it makes so much sense. But when we get stuck here, what happens is we now need to continuously recreate the scenario of the original experience. Not 100% the original thing, but the same experience. Now it can mirror itself, but the body actually wants to go back there and it wants to resolve it. So we continuously recreate scenarios similar to the original event in order to try and complete the movement. And this is why people seem to recreate similar situations for themselves over and 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 over again. From different perspectives, this could either be called the law of attraction. because that's in there. This is a law of attraction thing. It could also be called karma, which some people do, but I like to get out of the idea of karma because people have used that to blame you and make themselves like, oh, you know, it's because there's a problem with me, or I'm bad, I'm being punished. Or it could be called a biological survival strategy, same thing, or a spiritual opportunity for growth and expansion. I personally tend to believe it's all the same. I believe people have been looking at this from different angles, trying to communicate it, but it's all the same thing. The body wants to complete this journey. This reenactment can also be passed down from generation to generation. There's our ancestral trauma. Now, exactly how it gets passed down, again, people are looking at it from all of these angles. They're saying, well, it's a law of attraction thing. You get passed down, or it's karmic. One karmic pain is getting passed down to another karmic pain. Another person is saying, well, it's a biological survival response passed down through the family. Another person says it's a spiritual opportunity to end the cycle and grow and evolve through the family line. Same. It's all the same from different perspectives. Some types of reenactment look like relationship loops. Anyone been in one of them where you see yourself doing the same thing again and again and again? The narcissistic, codependent loop, or the knee, all the different loops of relationship. Physical abuse, coming in and again, sexual abuse, accidents. This one's a fascinating one. Have you ever heard of people who get in accidents again and again and again? Again, Peter Levine's talking about this. There was a crazy one where the grandfather was in a plane crash, and then his son was in a plane crash, and then his son's daughter was in a plane crash. What's the likelihood of 3 generations all getting into a plane crash and surviving? So there is this generation that hadn't completed itself. Rejection, so continuously being rejected, that's another one. Body problems, continuously creating body problems. And disease is another one, etc. There's many of them. These are the effects of trauma. Repetitive compulsion. I just like this. The urge for justice or to seek revenge may actually stem from the body's innate desire to complete the movement. Because we didn't resolve it properly, that urge to finish it, to get your revenge, to complete it, that actually all may be energy trying to complete the movement, trying to complete the story, trying to gain the spiritual wisdom from this situation. And this happens in individuals, but it happens globally, which means that we may need to recreate war again and again and again and again until we complete it as a collective. Have you noticed that we recreate some things globally, like war, again and again and again and again? There's certain things we just won't stop creating. Every time we build something new, we build it the same with slightly different flavor. However, unconscious reenactment isn't what completes the movement. Just recreating the situation doesn't resolve it. It just gives you the opportunity to resolve it. So the reenactment itself is not the solution. It is just giving you the data. You have to actually consciously complete the movement. The completion happens through healthy renegotiation, which we'll talk about soon. So this is starting to give you some more context to trauma, maybe than you've ever had before, hopefully, bringing all the pieces together we've gone through. One of the long-term effects of trauma, just adding this here, is that it can severely mess with this system of categorization and data storage. So, you've heard of people who they can't retain their memories, they can't recall memories, they struggle with memories and categorization and emotional regulation. It's actually one of the effects of trauma. So that's kind of a sucky part, because not only are you traumatized, you're messing up your nervous system responses. You can imagine all the issues this could cause with memory and recall. So just one of the symptoms of trauma. Need to complete the movement. Really need to complete the movement. I'm going to keep going, guys, and I'll answer your questions after, because I want to finish the story and then I'll write down your questions. So I'm going to say this 1,000 times. Must complete the movement. Now let's have a little bit of a deeper look at these survival strategies. These are behavioral patterns that can show up when the brain predicts that the system could be under threat, again, like it was in the past. This aspect, aka the protector selves, is designed to avoid the original trauma at all costs. These behaviors are sometimes the long-term symptoms of trauma. They actually are first the short-term and then they go into long-term. So I want to have a look at some of these. So hypervigilance, you can think of these as protector selves. This is what I love about our work, because we get to make this personal as opposed to just a dysfunction of the body. It's like, no, this is a protector self. And you can personalize it and humanize it so you can talk to them. So hypervigilance, aggression, anger, rage, denial, avoidance, absent-mindedness, neediness, attachment, detachment, rigidity, tightness, judgment. All of these things could kick in as survival responses. And as that moves into the body, what you may see in the person is chronic fatigue, headaches, digestive problems, skin problems, depression, chronic anxiety, sexual problems, reproductive problems, thyroid problems, libido problems. That could go in either way: hyperlibido, low libido, multiple personality disorder, cancer, diabetes, ADHD, etc. Nothing different than what I'm saying before, but just bringing another layer of depth as to why we do this. So it seems bizarre because we're at the same time, the body wants to go back into the original trauma to complete it. We are also trying to avoid it at the same time. So there's this dance, right? And I think what's happening is that we are avoiding it until we actually have the resources to complete it. But if we avoid it for too long, we end up over here. So at some point, the idea is that we actually learn enough resources to go in and complete the movement all the way through. Just quickly, in terms of hypervigilance, in the hypervigilant state, this is something to understand about people you're trying to help. All change is perceived as a threat. All change. And transformation is about change. So can you imagine how challenging it is to work with somebody who's in the hypervigilant state? Because that is changes externally and internally, because external change mirrors internal change. It's actually just change in the data of the body. So they want to stay somewhere they can get control of. So they become hypervigilant, but they don't want to come out of that hypervigilance because that's seen as a threat. So a lot of this unfounded paranoia that people have may be misguided perception of sexual arousal, because sexual arousal kicks into the hyperarousal state. But they actually might go towards sexual arousal and perceive it as a threat because it's a change of the body system. So now we have things like people terrified of sex. Another one here, or they might freak out when they drink too much caffeine in a soft drink, because that caffeine kicks the body into a bit of a hyperarousal state, and they're perceiving that as a change in the system, and now we're under threat. So people who are in the hypervigilant state, it might seem crazy, but they are going to be on edge with everything. And you're going to be like, why are you on edge from drinking a soft drink or having too much sugar? Because it's moved their body chemistry, and now the system is going, we're now in threat land. For these people, they may see and feel danger everywhere. At the core, these people do not feel safe, which is why safety becomes paramount, finding safety in the body. They end up with a jumbled orientation system, which means they can't orient properly. Everything is a threat. The breeze flying past their face too fast is a threat. They can't put that data together properly and go, okay, that was, it's not threatening, everything's threatening. This can turn into chronic anxiety. And I just wanted to put the definition here of chronic anxiety is to press tight or strangle. It's a good visual of how this feels. On the other side of it, I wanted to put it here, those people who've healed from hypervigilance, the superpower becomes extreme presence. So have you ever met anyone who's a facilitator in their older age who is just wickedly present? They pick up on every body move, every glitch, they feel the room. This hypervigilance can turn into extreme presence as the superpower. So a lot of people who are highly sensitive and extremely aware of the changes in the environment, usually extreme trauma survivors. That's why when you heal your trauma, you can become a phenomenal facilitator. Okay, a little bit more. Okay, back in our main diagram. We're going to come over here and look at the need to complete the movement. No matter what, if someone has experienced this type of trauma, I'm calling it trauma with a big T, I was going to take that out there, then the most effective healing processes we currently know of is to complete the movement, then change the brain's predictions. So with this type of trauma, up here in this hyperarousal state, I'm about to define the difference between trauma and socialization for you guys as well. Then if they get stuck, we have to complete the movement. I just want you to remember this, like completing the movement is the key to this. We've got to go through the process. Now I'm going to define the difference between trauma and socialization. Because up until now, today, this very moment, I have never done this before. I've always put them in the same category, but let me help you actually define these two. This is socialization. Data comes in through the peripheral nervous system, through the sensations, and they have an unpleasant arousal experience. Not extreme, unpleasant. Basically, when you're learning through socialization, you're learning over and over and over again that certain aspects of yourself are not okay to be felt. You're learning, I can't be this, I can be that. But it doesn't necessarily take for you to hit the freeze response to do it. You just can have you can have uncomfortable experiences and learn from it, but you don't go into the freeze response. So there is a difference here. It's a spectrum. So you still learn, okay, it's not safe to be this, but you don't necessarily go through the freeze response. It may result in the loss of a basic human need or is ineffective at getting a need met. It's a learning process. It's uncomfortable, for sure. It causes, if we go through it a bit more, it actually causes the same problems in some way, but to a lower extreme. This here would be socialization. Down here, these books. But you actually gain more information from socialization. You are learning, okay, not allowed to be that. If I change my response and I become this instead, then I avoid that pain. You have responses stored. It's not frozen. It's just different. It's a little different. So can you see how this is different? Socialization is a learning process, but it doesn't cause us to go into this extreme freeze response. The difference is right here. Still in the future, going to predict a threat because any of this could be a threat. You still can predict threats. These are mental threats more than anything. Actually, I'd say that socialization is more about mental threats, where you perceive that being a particular way will result in the loss of a need. There will be a story to that. I cannot be this, I cannot be that, it's bad to be this, I'm, et cetera, et cetera. There is an emotional effect to it, normally some sort of shame or guilt, and it's in the subconscious, just like all of it actually. Still create survival strategies. This is exactly the same. Still go on to create the same type of effect, actually. And guess what? You still play out these processes too. You will still play out these dramas in your life to try and heal this. It's just a different extent. It's a different level of pressure, and there's a different way to resolve it. That's why this is important to know. Another reason I really wanted to bring this up here is because hanging out again with Gaia, who's been in the field for a long time, she made the point that those people who are really intelligent in the field know the difference between socialization and trauma. They're not putting it in one category. They're not calling the fact that you didn't get to eat the chocolate when you were a kid and smacked because of it a trauma. And now you need to be able to get your chocolate again. That is a more like a socialization part, as opposed to extreme trauma like rape and abuse and PTSD. Now, of course, it doesn't mean, I'm putting in the next slides. Yeah, we'll do it here. So let me define these two things like this. Trauma, the nature of the impact when it's truly traumatic is that it results from a specific, often intense, adverse event or series of events that overwhelm the individual's ability to cope. So it hits that hyperarousal again and again and again and again. Examples include abuse, accidents, disasters, and significant losses. Socialization is a broader and more continuous process through which the individuals learn and internalize the values, norms, and behaviors of their culture or society by rejecting other parts. This happens primarily through interactions with family, peers, education systems, and media. The nervous system response is a bit different. Trauma often results in heightened and prolonged states of arousal in the nervous system. This can lead to a variety of physiological, psychological symptoms such as hypervigilance, hyperarousal, flashbacks, dissociation. In terms of socialization, it doesn't typically involve the same acute, overwhelming nervous system response. It's a bit different. Instead, it shapes behavior through patterns over time, through reinforcement, modeling, and social expectations. Can you just see it's not that it's completely different, it's just different in its intensity. Trauma can cause a freezing of energy in the nervous system. The body and mind may remain stuck in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and the trauma loop needs to be complete for healing. Techniques like somatic experiencing, EMDR, rapid eye movement, decentralization, the eye movement, Other trauma-informed therapies aim to help individuals process and integrate these experiences, allowing the energy to move and release. There's a similarity to actually changing the conditioning as well. Socialization can lead to adaptive behaviors that help individuals fit into their social context. While these behaviors may sometimes cause individuals to disconnect from aspects of themselves, e.g. suppressing emotions and aspects of themselves to conform to the social norms, the disconnection is generally less severe and more flexible compared to trauma. You're starting to just get a bit of an overview of the difference here. Severity, trauma often has a profound and lasting impact on an individual's mental health, relationships, and overall functioning. The severity can vary, but trauma typically involves a deep sense of helplessness or powerlessness at the time of the event. Socialization-induced behaviors and beliefs can often be changed through cognitive and reflective processes. You do not necessarily need to complete the movement in the same way. It's different. By increasing awareness and challenging social conditioning, individuals can make conscious choices to adopt new perspectives and therefore behaviors. This process often involves unlearning and reconditioning, which can be facilitated through education, self-reflection, and therapy. So when we do parts work and we go in and we find parts and we see it and we question it and we change our perspective and that changes how the body feels, this is healing socialization. With trauma, you can't do it that way. You've got to go through the body. You can't go through the mind. You've got to go through the body because the mind doesn't have enough data yet. We've got to drop through the body. Now, this also has a somatic part to it. It's just, again, slightly different. So, overview of the key differences. Origin and intensity is different. Trauma is from a specific, often severe event that overwhelms the individual's coping mechanism. Socialization is an ongoing process of learning and adapting to cultural norms and values, typically through less intense cumulative experiences. Physiological impact is a bit different. Trauma often results in a freezing of energy. Trauma always results in a freezing of energy and requires a therapeutic process to complete and release the energy. Socialization does not generally lead to a frozen state in the nervous system, but instead influences behavior through patterns that can be changed through therapeutic processes. Healing and change. Healing trauma usually involves addressing the physiological and psychological imprints of the traumatic event, often requiring specialized therapeutic interventions to help the person complete the movement. In terms of socialization, changing the effects of socialization can be achieved through conscious choice. It doesn't require the completion of an incomplete movement, simply the choice to change. Now, there is an overlap, obviously, for those of you who are like, but where's the overlap? There definitely is an overlap. So now I want you to see this. This may answer all the rest of the questions. You have socialization, you have trauma, and you have traumatic socialization. And unfortunately, traumatic socialization is increasing. That's the problem with the way that we're communicating things. Despite the differences, there is an overlap. For instance, some socialization processes can be highly traumatic, especially when they involve severe punishment, neglect, or intense pressure to conform. In such cases, the boundaries between trauma and socialization blur, and both types of intervention may be necessary. If the person goes into a freeze response during their socialization process, it's traumatic. Sadly, as I said before, the overlap is still getting bigger. This is why people are having a harder and harder time differentiating between the two. But I want you to see that there is a difference, and we do have that overlap in the middle. Trauma results in the freeze response. You need to complete the movement. Socialization results in the self-rejection response. You need to change the movement. Can you see the difference there? You can do that through conscious choice. Whereas this, you actually have to go back and move the body through to complete it. With this traumatic socialization, you're going to need to complete the movement and then change the movement. You can also change the movement here. We're almost done. Important similarity to keep in mind is this. Same. In both cases, trauma and socialization cause you to lose access to parts of yourself. Can you just hear that? Both cases, you lose access to parts of yourself. Now, some of these parts are deeply suppressed. Some of them are frozen. So this is how I want you to think about it. Some of those parts are frozen in the trauma response. Some of them are suppressed through socialization. So I've just put the crosses on the ones that are frozen in trauma, and these are the other ones that have just been suppressed, denied, rejected. You have all these parts, and you lose access to them because your upbringing taught you it's not safe to do so, and it's not safe to have access to these parts. So goodbye. These are what we term your vulnerable parts, and protector cells kick in to stop them coming to the forefront. What this means is that you can't live a full spectrum life because you don't have access to all the colors in your palette. You don't have access to calling on these parts of yourself in the moment because they're frozen or they're rejected. Some of these aspects are aspects of yourself that say no. Some of these aspects are aspects of yourself that say yes. Some of them are happy parts, some of them are sad parts, some of them are creative, some of them are sensual, some of them are sexual, some of them are more masculine, some of them are more feminine. This is yourself, and you've lost access to it. This is why you start living a more rigid, afraid life. How many aspects of yourself you've lost access to and what they are, unique for every person. Is it through more trauma that you've lost access, like freezing them, or is it self-rejection? At the end of the day, healing from trauma or unconditioning yourself has to do with regaining access to these frozen, lost, denied, rejected, or repressed aspects so that you can live a more authentic, full spectrum life. That's it. That's why all the healing that we do is just reconnection to all these pieces so that you, when life happens, you don't have to respond in a narrow bandwidth the way that society wants you to do, or the way that your conditioning or trauma wants you to do. You can react however the fuck you want because it's authentic. You gain access to your vocabulary. You gain access to your yeses, to your nos, to all the colors in between. That is what allows you to live a full spectrum life. It's holistic. I am going to finish, then I'll do questions. Healing from trauma through completing the movement. So as I've said, this is what happens. We go up the hyperarousal, we get stuck. This piece here, right at the top, peak anxiety. Do you guys remember back to listening to Huberman talk about healing with psilocybin? And they actually measured that in the therapeutic setting, the moment of most transformation happened at peak anxiety. You know why? Because this is what happened. It took that person into a hyperarousal state, and through the process, they completed it. That's why psilocybin can be very good. And certain psychedelics done in the right way, therapeutic psychedelics, can actually help guide someone into peak anxiety without overwhelming the system. And through the insight that they're having, they actually, this is why psychedelics are really cool, but we can do it without it. They give you access to more options. So when you go into the peak anxiety state, the brain opens up, the consciousness opens up and says, here are all the different ways you could have resolved it, and you can resolve through the process. And because the mind is in an altered state, the body is allowed to process. I've seen this in ayahuasca. I've had some great insight into how ayahuasca does help with this particular piece. And then, of course, you want to come back down. You want to come out of the hyperarousal. You want to come back down. You want to go into your peripheral nervous system, and you want to get back into the rest and the relax and the realize. You can't realize what you're meant to realize until you come out of this state. But the realization is on the other side. This is your spiritual realization. We're going to focus more on unsocialization through parts work. We're going to specifically focus on completing the movement for this next 2 weeks. So we're going to complete the movement, then change the prediction. With socialization, you can just change the prediction, and then the movement changes. But with trauma, you've got to complete the movement first. This is a body. This is a somatic experience. We want to go through the body before we go through the mind. So we go through the somatic, we complete the movement, then we integrate with the mind. So this is like going back here and saying, we've got to go through the somatic experience here before we come down to realization. We don't want to try and go to realization before completing the movement. Got to go through. This is you can't think your way out of this one. You've got to feel your way through this one, all the way through. Again, please don't misunderstand that I'm saying there's no somatic aspect to the desocialization. There is a somatic aspect. It must go through the body as well. It's not that this is through the body and that's not through the body. It's that the sequence of events is different. This one has to go through the body first. Whereas the unsocialization, the desocialization, you can go through the mind to actually desocialize, and then it moves through the body. Understand? So there's still somatics on both sides. And there's, of course, as I said, an overlap. Okay. Take a big deep breath. Breathe all the way out. Feel your fingers and toes. Just shake out the body for a second, or let the body do a little shake. Let it process that big bunch of information that I just shared with you there. Let it go in, shake it in. I have only 5 slides towards the end, so this is where we're at here. Now, Peter Levine is talking about the law of polarity and vibration towards healing. He's actually quoting the Kabbalion, and he's saying that if we don't tap into the natural laws of the universe, we can't heal. So he has developed his healing modalities using those laws. So I want to show you this. Put this together. Here is your high valence. Here's your valence versus arousal scale. We've talked about this. Now, high valence unpleasant arousal is going to be your uncomfortable experiences over here. Your traumas are up here. So this is extremely activated, unpleasant experiences. Over this side is extremely pleasant, activated experience. So over here you have, I mean, it's sad that it's such a obvious comparison, but over here you have rape, and over here you have peak orgasm. You know, they're kind of like 2 different sides, from extreme pleasure to extreme unpleasant experience. So what Peter Levine is saying here is that we must work through this law of polarity and vibration. Vibration being the movement. We want to move. We want the body to go through its natural rhythmic moving phases. But he's really sharing that you want to go through the polarities. You want to actually start to dance between the 2. And I haven't really gone here before in a very scientific, or I've really had to think about this, because I think that I think he's correct if you're working with the laws of the universe. So the idea is that you find a safe place, which would kind of be down here, which is a pleasant low valence. You know, we're kind of getting into the relaxation down here. So let's say we find our safe place, and then through dropping deeper and deeper into the body, you can shift into a more aroused state. And then you might need to dance back to your safe place. And then you let the body become more aroused. And then you dance back over here. And then you can let the body become more aroused. And then you start waving through the journey of the somatics by going into peak arousal or getting towards peak arousal, and making sure that you're resourcing yourself by knowing there is a safe place here, you have resources. Now let's go back to the arousal. So you're kind of retraining the body that you have resources to meet that peak arousal. You can do this through the meditation. So I just want you to think about this as you're taking people through sessions. You're going to be dancing, and it's okay if you see that someone's getting too hyper aroused, they don't know what to do. Resource them back to safe place. Find a place in the body that feels safe. Go back to the heart. Feel that. I think all of this is resourcing. Call in a guardian angel. Bring in a power animal. Can you feel that power animal with you? Call in Mother Nature. Do you need God to turn up? Whatever it is. Bring in the tribe. You know, resourcing is resourcing, and you can do it in the imagination, doesn't it? A lot of this is imagination. Even the memory is remembered imagination. So we're dancing. And what you will find is that as we start to process this peak arousal, it actually may shift over into peak pleasure. And you'll see those polarities shift as well from negative to positive. So just watch this. This is just a map so you can see it's about movement. It's about movement and shifting the polarities. I put the little key over here. This is the valence versus arousal. Let's have a look. So getting all the way up here, you've got anger, fear, alarmed, infuriated. Terror could probably be up there. On this side, you're looking at satisfied, relaxed, content, calm on this side. On this side, we've got excited, happy, delighted, glad. And down here, it's more gloomy, miserable, depressed, bored. So I see you kind of moving between these 2 polarities the most. And then when the healing happens, you might find yourself over here in the delighted. space. Before I go through the steps, I'm going to give you this diagram. It's the final one of the whole presentation for today. It's the same as a hero's journey, guys. It's exactly the same. This whole journey, when we sit back and look at the hero's journey, we're going to go, that's what's happening. Your spirit wants to complete hero's journeys. That's all we're doing. We're continuously completing a hero's journey. So what is happening when you're taking somebody through a session to complete the trauma is in their world, let's put it this way. They have, in their own way, kind of got to the freeze response. Maybe they've approached the ordeal, but they never fully processed it. They didn't slay the dragon. Their life has got them to that point. Now they're here as adults, but they're stuck. Maybe a handful of their ultimate ordeals. And yes, there's more than one sometimes. So when you start to take somebody through a session, all right, they come to you. They say, okay, I want to heal. Maybe you're saying, okay, we're going to do this thing. And they're like, oh, I don't know about this. And they're meeting the mentor. So let's just say, okay, a session really starts when they turn up and they're like, okay, you're the mentor, you're going to guide them. And you say, okay, let's go. We're going to cross the threshold. Session starts here. Close your eyes. Let's go. Close your eyes. The second you close your eyes and you start dancing through those polarities, you're game on, right? Game on. Find your safe place. Now, let's find the somatics. Let's go through the memory. Find this. And when you start dancing. Now, through the session, you start dancing, and the idea is that you want to start to approach that innermost cave. Maybe you go through some little trials and tribulations along the way in the session. Maybe there's little bits here and there, or you're in a journey and you're touching on some memories and they're getting closer, but they're not the thing. You're touching on some feelings, it's getting more aroused. And this could happen within a minute, or it could happen over half an hour, depending on who you're working with. But eventually, you find yourself hit the ordeal. You know this because when it comes to trauma, they're going to start to feel fear. They're going to start to feel anxiety. They're going to start to feel anger. They're going to start to feel rage. They're going to start to feel terror. They will communicate this to you. The body might start to shake. It might get cold. You will know when you're starting to reach the peak ordeal because of those key energies. You're looking for fear, anxiety, peak anxiety, stress, anger, rage, terror, all of this stuff. Person might start to cry. Once you reach peak anxiety, you guys are like, oh, how do I help this person? Think about it like a movie. It really is like this. They must fight and then get out. They have to. You're going to see this in all the trauma responses that we ever come across. There needs to be a way that that person can fight. Now, don't worry about whether that's like morally okay or not. The person needs to regain their power through discharging that energy. The fight doesn't need to physically hurt somebody else, but it can in their imagination. All of that's okay. We'll talk about this more when we get to the inner child work. We'll go through this again in much more depth. We're pretty much just doing this for inner child work as well. We'll talk more about steps. Today, we're going to be doing a bit of it. Let the person fight. That's it. By letting them fight, they will come up. That you don't need to tell them how to fight. You don't need to tell them what to fight. They'll tell you and you give them permission. That's it. Now they can do it in their imagination or they can do it around you. I was with Alana a couple of months ago. She had a bit of a peak arousal experience. That's a good. Can I share your little story here, Alana? Alana had a peak arousal experience. So she went into peak arousal, and this is what she did. She decided to try and emanate light from herself to handle her peak arousal situation. Okay, so what happened there? Let's just go through it, Alana. She went, I don't want to fight. Fighting is not the way to do this. I don't want to fight and I don't want to run. I've got to go into like a Buddha state. So she tries to like radiate light from her heart. But the arousal got more and more and more and more until she pretty much went to a freeze response, a type of a freeze response. You didn't know what to do. Your radiating of light wasn't working. And so you just were like, okay, that's it. I would say there was a bit of like, okay, fine, I disconnect. And interesting, Lana, if we really look down at it, if you could have done what you wanted to do, my guess is you would have said to this person, no.
Yeah. You
just would have said, no, thank you. Don't come near me. But instead, you didn't do that, and you went into a bit of a freeze, and you let them come and give you a massage, right? I'm not going to tell the story, but this is what happened. Later on, I came up to Alana, and I'm like, so what happened? And she told me, she's like, and I was radiating light from my heart, and I was like, No. You're angry, man. You need a way to suppress your anger. And I get that you can't go into a full-fledged battle around 16 people and go into a fight, but guess what you can do? You can close your eyes and you can imagine it all the way through. You can imagine going to battle with this person, blowing them up, setting them on fire, throwing them off the bridge. Like inside, you can fight. This is what you can do. And then you can run. You can do whatever you need to inside. You can resource yourself and actually go through the process internally and let that energy, that hyperarousal, discharge through the system. People don't even need to know. Now, this is less severe. You could literally have taken yourself through your own trauma healing response, right? You could have just tapped your feet on the ground and been like, I'm running, or you could have imagined yourself, shoot, I've done this before. I've been in situations where I'm so angry and I can't move and I need to just be like, I look normal on the outside, but on the inside, I'm waging war against the space. I've done this so many times. I love it. Someone who's deeply frustrating me in the external world. And so I imagine all sorts of things. I imagine, blowing things up. I think that's one of my favorites. I've also seen somebody with so much energy and they didn't know what to do. And they were so angry with the world that I said, why don't you just run around the world? Like imagine yourself running around the world and just blowing it up because you hate it so much. You hate people, blow everybody up, kill them all. This is all okay. You need a way to resource yourself. You're allowed to go through that. And then you want to get out of the situation. So in terms of a session, the way that I see this happening is you go through your battle, your fight. However you do it, everyone's going to do it differently. Then you need to leave. Then you need to leave that memory. And so you do that by actually leaving, deciding you're done, finish it, complete it, leave. And what you can do in a meditation is go back to your heart. Finish by taking them out of the hyperarousal state and resource back to the heart, but only after they complete the movement. So you resource, you complete your fight, your battle, and you return to your heart. Now, in an external way, some people may actually realize they have to physically leave the situation they're in, and that may be a secondary response. That actually may happen. But in a session, you can leave the memory. You can leave the process, but only once it's complete. Because remember this, if you don't complete the movement, you can go back to the heart, no problem. But if you haven't completed it, your reality nervous system will pull you back to it another time to complete. You cannot get out of this. So we want to resolve it. You got to do that through, as he says, releasing the energy, moving the energy, completing the process, discharging the adrenaline in the system. So the adrenaline discharges, you move back towards relaxation. Okay, now we're on the other side. Guess what? We begin the road back. The road back from where? From sympathetic arousal towards parasympathetic arousal. That's the road back. Guess what happens as you actually start to return to real relax, rest, and realization? The resurrection happens. You have access to insight. You have access to self. More of you comes on board. You wake up. So now you have access to that insight. This insight is always spiritual in nature. When you really sit down and think about it, you go back and you realize things that you didn't realize. There's a reason all of this happened in the first place. It wasn't just a biological problem or an accident. Even accidents have spiritual wisdom in them. There's a reason that you went through it, and you can extract that. Now, do you make it up? Sure, it doesn't really matter. You gain wisdom. So what happens? You return with the elixir wisdom. This is the whole point. So you've got to go through this ordeal and come out the other side and gain your wisdom. Now, what does that wisdom do? Guess what? It goes back into your nervous system and stores the data. So that in the future, if you come towards a hyperarousal, it will go to the wisdom file and go, we've done this before. Here's the response. I've got the wisdom. Now, in the future, instead of acting with the fight, flight, or the freeze response and the protect yourself, you respond with wisdom. So it's a hero's journey that we're completing. I actually got through it in relatively good time. There we go, guys. I was hoping a little bit quicker, but there we go. So, Joey, let's do questions and then let's move into experience.
Okay, so amazing. There's just so much in this. So a couple of questions. One is that just trying to understand the natural process of healing. And I know this is all the natural process of healing, but what I mean is if the nervous system has this way of dealing with trauma, in that we we get hypervigilant and we get frozen in, perceiving things as any change can be a threat. Our orientation is jumbled. We see danger everywhere. We have these predictions that we are seeing people in that way, and we get stuck in that state of being. And then we attract experiences that kind of reflect that, in an attempt to complete the process. So a question pops into my mind, because nature is intelligent, isn't it? Like, it has a way of resolving things. And as you're describing the whole process, I think that's the intelligence of kind of resolving the thing. But it also seems that it's quite a very refined way to complete the process, that, and also this healing comes about by the grace of someone coming into your life, and either, let's say, you having the experience that is corrective, meaning that if you were really abused and you were mistreated a lot, then you experience an intimate relationship where there's a lot of love and compassion, all of that. So it's by the grace of God, let's say, or you happen to meet someone that, like, for example, meet you or meet us as a facilitator and say, hey guys, let's understand this whole thing. Let's work here, 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 and there. So I'm trying to understand what is the nature's very fundamental response, because that helps to resolve that, because it seems very kind of like a gloom that nature has put us in this situation, that it keeps us stuck. We are seeing things a certain way, we're responding in similar ways. What is our own innate nature-based way to getting us out of this?
What do you think about this answer? Tell me what you think. If nature is wise,
yeah,
and we are nature, everything about our setup is nature, then what if this is it?
Yeah, that's it. We are kind of coming up with all of this. That's right.
Do interestingly, in the Gene Keys, it says that we're explorers. Consciousness is exploring different ways of doing things. And even in nature, you're going to recognize that nature adapts. So something happens and it explores, and if it doesn't work out, it's going to find a different way or a different way or a different way. Being here on Zoom is just one of the ways that we're adapting and searching. So all that we can kind of identify is something wants to happen. Something wants to happen, because we have got to this point where we recognize something is trying to happen, and it's continuously trying to happen. And we are searching for, let's say, the most effective way to do it. Now, is this it? Who fucking knows? But we've got to try something, because it hasn't happened yet. When we look at the global state of things, let's just go to the biggest story of all. Fabio's going to like this. We are on one global hero's journey from hell to heaven. We are trying to get to the Garden of Eden, as everybody knows, in some way. Everyone's talking about the new earth, from the biblical times to the modern new age tech times. It's a one story that humanity is trying to complete, from hell to heaven. So what we can see is that no matter what, we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep trying, and we're going to potentially figure it out only through trying, and we're going to have to go through that process, come out the other side, and the wisdom will come when we're there. There's a little bit of like, we're going to try everything and figure it out, and now we're going to learn through the process. Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? Now, I've been teaching trauma for 6 years, and I've taught thousands is an overstatement. I've taught numerous different ways to do this, but I then look at the community, and people still turn up, and they still have the same questions, and people are still going to Peter Levine's, and they're still doing their ayahuasca, and I'm like, maybe it's not the end of the story yet. So let's try and combine and look at this from numerous directions. I think what I am attempting to do, and you guys can all do this in your own way, is connect the dots. I mean, like, well, maybe it's not. This is my prediction. I don't think it's about this way being the right way, or this way being the right way, or this way being the right way. I think it's about bringing everything together. So a lot of what I have just shared with you today is the intellectual understanding of this. Gaia, bless her soul, would argue that none of it's necessary. You don't really need to know. It doesn't matter. Turn up, do the movement, live your life. Like, that's it. Now, I came back and I said, I actually understand that that will work for some people, but based on the people that I work with and looking into nature and reality as it is, I see that the intellect has become a huge barrier to just naturally shaking it out. That's it. You want to know the fastest way to heal trauma? Shake it out. Ugh. That's it. Discharge the energy. Discharge the energy. Shake it out. However, it doesn't work because the intellect comes along and it has its whole piece to say about it. It won't let you do it. So I say, all right, if we need to spend an hour and a half going back through, if we need to spend weeks understanding the body, the mind, the intellect, so that your mind goes, it deconstructs itself and eventually goes, oh, I get it. Understanding causes some relaxation. Boom, we can get into the body. Then I'll do it, because I actually think my personal feeling is that the mind wants to be a part of this.
Beautiful.
So I ponder that in your own way. Guy's been with me for 3 days. I'm kind of quoting her. She said this to me, and I'm going to share it with you guys. Nothing I share with you today is the truth. There is no way to put the truth in diagrams and explain it through the intellect. It's all just concepts. We're using concepts to build a bridge out of concepts to move across that bridge so that we can have an experience. When we have that experience, the bridge will disintegrate. So this is all just concepts that we use. Isn't that fun? So nothing I'm telling is the truth. I'm telling you a bunch of lies, but they're helpful lies. Because the ultimate truth cannot come through language and diagrams. Relative.
So I love that, the big picture perspective and the whole movement that we see that is happening through expression and embodiment and doing inner work is the very natural process of healing. The other thing I want to say as well quickly is that, like, in the process of healing, that I've been working with trauma using hypnosis and a couple of other things. And so just kind of to understand exactly what is happening. And, this, what you've mentioned about, like, it needs to go through the body. And I've been seeing clients, let's say, in a format of 3 sessions normally. Like, one is the initial consultation, then the 3 intervention sessions, where we do the work a lot through hypnosis. So it's like going into the mind and going on an experience. And the major pillars of the healing is, to kind of like bring back the traumatic experience, but from an empowered state of being. There's a lot of priming for the client to become that empowered and tap into what is known as protector anger, that flips us from being in a helpless state into an empowered state.
Yeah.
And from that space, we look at the perpetrator, imagine it there, and then we discharge that energy. We say things, we do things just as you described, can do whatever you want. So there is that discharge of the anger. And after that, after it's done, we turn away, and then we go and meet that younger version of self and meet the emotional needs. It's not your fault, you're beautiful, you're deserving of love, and all of these things. And that's quite an incredible kind of, it's been exceptionally effective. Like, people with 30 years of, chronic trauma, sexual abuse, all these things have really benefited and healed a lot of the trauma. So what the observation here is that I think 2 things. One is that when we engage in the consciousness, the psyche, in this imagination hypnosis, that I see the person actually, like, the breathing. So there's a whole biological phenomenon that's taking place. So it is engaging the body in that way.
Yep.
I also do want to include more somatics in the work as well to continue that.
Well, let's just define somatics before you say that, because somatics can be very subtle. I think sometimes when we think somatics, we think the big movements, but somatics is tears.
Yeah.
It's trembling in the system. It's just even watching all the muscles twitch under the skin.
Yeah.
the movement's happening, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a big cathartic movement. That happens sometimes, but you're going to also notice this. If you're in the hypnotic state, and let's say that you were a young child who was severely beaten by your parent and put in, like, you're continuously beaten, part of your healing may be to feel all that rage and to, because I'm just using this, you may actually need to leave that home and burn it to the ground. You may actually need to move and burn it. So you go through that process of imagining yourself burning your family home to the ground. You actually will watch the person's body start to react as though they're doing that thing. And if you had sensors on their brain and you could see that, you would actually notice the movement parts of the body lit up. So you would watch them, if they had a vision of moving their arm or pumping the explosive, you would see that happen in the brain without them actually having to move the body. That's also somatic, because it's still moving through the body. It's just not as big as you think. So I would say that if you're guiding them, somatic therapy is happening. It's happening. You've got to just, get out of this idea of how big that movement needs to be. It could be anything.
That's already taking place. Yeah. And the other thing as well, I think in accessing that anger, because if you're saying, tap into that fight and flight, completing the trauma response would involve actually going into a fight, reaching that peak. And some people, I've noticed that some people, they really struggle with that, because I don't want to get angry with my mom. I understand her and all of these things. So I guess it's just the importance of really being quite flexible, which is what I'm learning a lot through what you're sharing here, having all these tools to actually work with, protect yourself in that way.
Exactly.
Even
so
like doing some work. Okay. Yeah.
Firstly, it sounds like what you're doing is amazing. All I wanted to say is get better at it. Just keep going. Just keep going and get better and better at it. So what you're saying here is and we'll talk about this again when we get to the inner child stuff, because that's just going to be another conversation, specifically around traumatic socialization. That's really what the inner child work is. So what you're pointing to here is exactly what stops the innate healing process. And you're going to notice this in clients who they are going through this journey with you, and they get closer and closer to the hyperarousal, and all the protective selves start kicking in. And they go, I don't want to fight. I don't want to be angry. It's not right to do this. And all the conditioning kicks in, which is why you have to develop strategies for working with all those protector selves, which is why we're doing this for months. And you're going to learn all this. You're going to be able to put it all together. But yes, you've got to be flexible. And you've also got to be the one who helps that person realize it's okay to be angry. It's actually a natural thing to be angry. That energy is a natural response. And so we want to discharge that energy. And so it might take some sessions to get there, because some people may be so conditioned. Traumatic socialization is some of the hardest. Not trauma, like just accidents, challenging, but it doesn't have all the mental jargon around it. It has some. But the traumatic socialization is challenging, because to get back to the trauma, the actual hyperarousal has layers of socialization beliefs around it as well. And it has all these ideas, not just about like why it's dangerous to go there, but now they've made an identity out of their pain, and they actually get down there and realize they don't want to give it up. So then we've got all that side of the socialization as well, who've made identities out of their pain and their protector selves. And they actually realize, holy shit, if I do this, my identity is going to go as well. That's the next part of the healing trauma piece, because you heal traumatic socialization, protect the vulnerable parts integrated. It's no longer who you are. And you got to move into the unknown. So then they have this terrifying process of like, now what? Who am I on the other side? That's the next phase we got to work with people. So you're doing an amazing job.
Beautiful. Thank you. Just
keep doing
some reflections.
Keep adding the pieces. You're integrating over the years. I see you do this. You're pulling this piece and this piece. Now add the human needs in there. It's great. It's great. Sia.
Thank you.
Hey, so I just have a follow-up question that came in, because I was in a session once where I was guided in the healing process to like be angry, like really like go crazy with my mom.
Right.
And I've been going through this huge healing process with her, like it was crazy. And I'm like, I feel like I'm on the other side. But in that session, I was being guided to like, no, you can do whatever. Just like, you know, if you want to yell at her or punch her, I can't remember. And I just was like, no, it doesn't feel good. I fully understand everything that happens and I'm okay. So
yeah.
I
So
actually,
hold that there.
feel good.
I can already hear the question. This is a great question for everybody. And I think that when I was a little more naive, I pushed people to get angry because I was like, let's go through the somatic process. Here is the next key part of it. It must be authentic. So when you get to the hyperarousal state with somebody, you as the facilitator do not tell them what to do. You encourage their natural inclination. If they want to go into a fight response, encourage the fight in the way they want to do it. So for instance, you're going to have to be very creative here. So let me say I'm, working with, with Maddie. And we get into Maddie's hyperarousal state. And I have no idea how Maddie wants to fight out of this. But she doesn't quite know either, but we look around the space and it's like, okay, so she's like, well, I'll make something up completely. I'm 7 years old and somebody broke into our house when I was 7 years old. And I was responsible for protecting my younger sister. And nobody was there to protect me. And I had to go into this state and I had to protect my sister. And it was all very hyper threatening, whatever. So let's just say that's the scenario. Now I go in with Maddie and she goes in through the body and the somatics. Now we don't necessarily have to go to that memory first, but it might come up during the session. And so we're back there because that's what happens. And the memories come up and she doesn't know what to do, but I'm there to say, okay, look around the room. Maybe you didn't look around the room when you were here and see, whilst this guy's come in, is there any resources you weren't aware of? And she goes, oh, there's a window. I didn't notice the window when I went through it the first time. And I'm like, great, can you grab your sister and go towards the window? And so then we go towards the window. And so we're doing this thing internally. We're changing it. We're completing it. It's like, how do I say this so it sounds really I want it to land in your mind. You've got to think of it as a movie. I think that's the best way to do it. Think of it as a hero's journey movie. And in the past, Maddie had her hero's journey and she got to a particular point and there was a particular ending, but it didn't resolve well. And anyone watching the movie would be like, that doesn't feel complete. There was no completion, there was no return, there was no wisdom, there was nothing. So we go back and watch the movie again. And we get to the same scene, but the next time we say, can we do it differently? Now, for most people who don't have the resources, they'll just continuously play it out and they get stuck there. But a facilitator comes in and you're the one who says, okay, let's get back to that moment and pause. Let's look around. What didn't you see in the first time? What didn't you know was available to you? In this realm, guess what? You have access to guardian angels. You have access to your imagination. You have access to resources. You have access to your heart. You have, like what Jao was saying, maybe in this situation, you can pause it and access source consciousness. You bring your empowerment and you start to resource that and you want to change the ending. And so this is really what you're doing. It's very similar to being in a shamanic journey with somebody. You're down there and it's real time. That is what I want to say. It's real time. And you got to understand, we got to do something different we've never done before. This person needs to do something they've never done before. And I'm here to help do something that's never been done before. So you got to get creative, which is why transformational facilitators are creative. You have to have access to your resources, which is why you have to heal your trauma so that you can get down there in the underworld, because this is where you are. You're in the underworld. You're in the shadow. And you go, how am I going to help this person? Because that's what you're doing as a facilitator. Slay their dragon, leave the situation and complete this journey and come out the other side victorious. And this is where my piece comes in spiritually, because the idea is gaining wisdom, not just to get revenge and come out the other side and feel like you've got revenge, because I don't think that's what the universe is trying to complete. It actually wants you to come through it and gain the spiritual wisdom, which is the integration, which is why what Jawa is talking about, we're not going to do that today, but that becomes another piece. Now go back, find the inner child, meet their needs, integrate them, learn from the experience. For those of you who've done the inner child healing process with me before, which we're going to get to, you then take the person back to their heart and you meet all their needs as you were talking, And then you go look in the crystal ball and you look at the past experience and you learn. Who did you become because of it? What superpowers were in it? Why did this happen? And when you look at that past event and go, I've got my lessons and I wouldn't change the past. Now you can integrate the memory and you will move on, because the universe wants you to pick that wisdom up too. I would say completing the movement is a piece of it. It's very biological. This is why I'm saying, no, you've got to complete the hero's journey. Because it's not just about completing the movement, it's about getting the elixir from it as well, and changing and coming back wiser.
So when, because for me, I did have the lessons and I understood everything and I was grateful for all the things, but then I was guided to like be the adult protecting myself and be like, you know, now it's time to.
This thing, right? Let me say this to you. You know from that session that whoever this facilitator was, bless their soul, was trying to take you on their journey. They had an idea of what you should be doing, but when you gave actually some pushback and that wasn't the authentic path, they didn't know what to do. So they tried to guide you in the only way they knew how. That seems to be what I'm hearing happen. Now, what I'm saying to you is follow that authenticity. Same for everybody. It must be authentic. Person can't get angry if they don't want to get angry. But if the anger is there, help them get angry, because it actually is there. They want to be angry. They've just been conditioned out of it. If the person wants to leave, let them leave. Let them leave in the way they want to leave. Resource them. When the person says, I'm done for the day and this is, I'm good here, cool. Trust that person, trust their body, trust it. Your job is.
So it's also like a balance from our point of view when they are like, no, I don't need to be angry at them. It's like, okay, is that the truth? Or are they still like hiding, right?
So if you as a facilitator are curious, or even like you have a sense maybe they're not being truthful with themselves, and you may have that sense, but always remember, you might not know. That may be your ego. You have to know this. Okay. So ask a good question. That's all you need to do. All you need to do is you say, are you sure?
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Now, as you get better and better as facilitators, guess what? The key thing is that you all need, and you can do this online, is hyperpresence. Hyperpresence. Because people's bodies, even online, you don't even need to see their feet, you'll feel it, will give it away. So when they say, you know, I'll give you again an over-exaggerated example. If they've got their shoulders up and they say, no, I'm good, you're going to be like, I can see that you're not good. You're hyperventilating. Your shoulders are in like a protection space and you've got snot coming down their face and they're like, oh, I'm good. That's an exaggeration, but you can see that in the subtleties. And so you can eventually get to a person and you can see maybe they've got their hands clenched and they don't even know. And they're like, no, I feel calm. And your job is not to say, no, you don't. It says, just look at your hands. And that person might look and go, fuck, I didn't even realize. Oh my God, I'm so angry. I'm so angry, because they didn't realize. So that's kind of your job to go, are you sure? Why don't you just check out what's going on with your hands, or feel your jaw, or, you know. So this is our job as we get better at this, is not to tell, it's to point out what already is there, help that person become aware, and the body gives it away.
Yeah.
Cool. You guys are going to be like, you know, we're going to do this weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So we're not going to learn all these pieces now, but every week from here on out, guess what? We're healing trauma and socialization. Every week, trauma and socialization. We're healing the trauma. We're integrating the socialization. We're regaining all the parts of ourselves so that we can manifest a different life. So we're going to, I know we're almost at 2 hours now, and I thought we'll have 2 hours of practice, but again, I guess this piece is really important. Patrick, last question, then we're going into.
Wait, I have my question. I need to ask.
Go, what's your question? Sorry.
Okay, so this is huge. It fucks with my mind. When you said that, you know, the thing about trauma and socialization, I was like, no, not true. I cannot say this to anyone. This is not true, because everything I've learned, everything, the video, everything is saying trauma doesn't need to be this huge like car crash, a death. It can be the little moment, because in that moment as a child.
So this is not incorrect. This is not incorrect. However, the only difference that I'm saying here to you is that you have to look at the level of hyperarousal in the nervous system. Okay? So I'm not saying that the little event didn't cause a freeze response. Sometimes the little events cause the freeze response. So it's not about the event itself. It's about how that event landed in the body.
Yes.
Right? So now what I just want you to understand, so make a bigger map here. Somebody being neglected may cause a hyperarousal experience that gets locked in the nervous system as a freeze response. That's a trauma. But if somebody just learns through witnessing their parents manipulate each other, how to manipulate to get what they need, the body didn't necessarily have to go into a freeze hyperarousal response, but they still conditioned themselves. They still had to learn, I should be, like they might go, let me think about this. Let me think of an example. People pleasing. Okay, maybe they watch their mum people please their father all the time to get what she needs. And this learning process happens where the child goes, okay, I've got to become a people pleaser to get what I need from my father. And so they unconsciously disconnect from the part of themselves that asks for what they want and becomes more of the yes. You know, they don't say no, they say yes. But they didn't have to go through the hyperarousal freeze response to do that. Now they're still disconnected from a part of themselves. Now in the past, thank goodness for hotspot. So Alexia, it's not that you're incorrect. It's just that I wanted to make a differentiation between socialization and trauma, which is why there's that scale there. Can you start to see that piece?
Yeah. So that's more learning beliefs and like
Yes.
slowly being imprinted.
In the past, I have defined trauma as disconnection from your authentic self. Now, if we're defining trauma as disconnection from authentic self, you are correct that every type of socialization is traumatic. And we could do that. The only reason I'm starting to redefine them a little bit is because the process to healing is different. You don't have to help somebody desocialize through this completion of the movement process. If they are absolutely identical, the healing can be identical. It's like saying, I don't like using this example, but when people make drugs, you got to understand that one drug doesn't work for everything. And so this is why I'm now starting to define, okay, your parts work sessions that you can do with somebody that don't include hyperarousal, going into fight, then into flight, and then uncovering, like going that exact process. That's a possible, you can heal just by doing that. You don't have to do a trauma release for every transformation. Now, does that land?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
You, as a facilitator, just need to have an even broader understanding of the spectrum. Have I said that clearly enough for everybody so that it's clear? Because this is a piece that, again, not many people talk about, and I think there's confusion in the system. Everything's trauma. If everything is trauma in the way that we're defining hyperarousal, then everything needs to be healed through doing a completion of the movement. But I have witnessed you don't have to do that for every session. You don't have to. Sometimes it's enough to go inside, see the part of yourself and go, oh, that part is the unworthy part that got picked up from my mom, and I can change my perspective and I can integrate that and I can shift it. And I don't need to go through a fight, flight, unfreeze the nervous system response. I go through a somatic journey, but not exactly that one.
Is that like the difference between the little T trauma and big T trauma, like socialization?
Yeah, that's what I was putting in there. Some people have actually started trying to define it like that, and they're calling it big T and little t. All trauma, big T, little t. The reason we have to change the definitions or expand it is because the healing processes are different.
Yeah, so oh, sorry, someone else.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. It's all good.
No, what I just wanted to share is I had some experiences with spiritual healing from really high above dimensions, not the astral plane, really divine energy. That when I got this healing, beforehand I was stuck. I was freeze. I couldn't do anything, and by this healing, so to say, I was switched and turned around without any body response. you know, I just wanted to say it doesn't have to go over the body. There's also ways when you really working with powerful healers that you just, so to say, can switch it with divine energy, and afterwards your body's just different, but he didn't have to go through this again. So yeah, that's what I want to do one day.
Well, this is where the healing buses come into play, which you guys might have heard before. It's a great metaphor. There's 3 types of bus. This is a Keith analogy. You've got the hard bus, the easy bus, and the magic bus. The hard bus is your drama karma pathway. It's not where you're consciously doing your healing work. Life will just, you will loop in that cycle until life beats you into shape and you figure it out. You know, you've got to go through such, life just brings up the drama karma loops again and again and again and again until you figure it out. The easy bus is where you do this work. You go in and you say, I'm going to go and put myself in an environment, and I'm going to consciously go into these spaces, and I'm going to consciously work on them and transform them. But you're still doing inner work. You go into the traumas, you heal them. The magic bus work is your parallel jumping. Your parallel jumping is where you go, there's an infinite number of realities, and I don't actually need to go through the healing of the trauma process. I just need to shift realities. However, you don't open the door to that very easily if you haven't done enough trauma work first, because this is what happens. You shift into a parallel reality and your unconsciousness pulls you back into the trauma loop. Happens all the time. So you go and you do a powerful meditation and you shift, but all the unconscious programs and patterns in you, because you haven't woken up enough to understand what the heck you're doing, straight back. You don't even realize it. So we asked Keith this once, because we're like, why don't we just all quantum leap? Never have to do this stuff. And he's like, doesn't work. And you know why I believe it doesn't work? Because there are pockets of wisdom that you pick up through doing this completion process. And so you got to wake up the wisdom. There's like there's initiation on this journey. There's always been initiation. There's rites of passage. And so part of the rite of passage is to do your inner work to a degree and pick up enough wisdom in order for the gates to open that allow you to do the quantum leaping in a more conscious way. And enjoy it, guys. Most people want to go from like, so many people like don't have a lot of consciousness, or let's say they're at a low level of understanding. I hate the word low. They don't have much understanding and they want to become the Buddha. It's like, yeah, and you're going to have to go on a rite of passage pathway, and you absolutely have access to it. But just in the same way that the Buddha had a journey to go on, he had his own hero's journey. You have your own hero's journey, and life is not going to let you bypass it. So whatever your particular hero's journey is, you can't bypass it. If quantum leaping and never having to do an ounce of inner work and processing it through the body is your journey, cool, I've never met that person. Every person I've ever met has had to go through the allowance of the feeling of hell to go through their system first. It's like you have to touch hell to be able to swing to the polarity of heaven. So if you've done that enough, cool, you don't have to do that anymore. But if it hasn't processed from the system, the energy of hell needs to process through your system for you to swing to the polarity of heaven. And the universe knows that already, so no one gets out of it. So this is why I say you may as well just surrender and swing on into hell and let it process your way through to heaven, because it's already there. And being born in the West, we walked into hell. Seriously, we walked into hell. We were conditioned into we are the culture, I put myself right in it, of the most amount of ignorance and arrogance ever. Because we're top heavy. We are extremely ignorant. Really, we are. And arrogant at the same time. We think we know everything and we know nothing. And it makes us such painful candidates for healing, because we're the ultimate bypassers, because we know how to get away from pain. And I'd say, I love it as well. It's part of the evolution. We're in spiral dynamics. It's like we're like green to yellow trying to get to turquoise, right? And a lot of ignorance and arrogance comes from green into yellow. And now we're using our mind through yellow, which is necessary, but it can actually bring some arrogance with it, which is why the next phase is out of the mind into the body. Want to try some of that now? Cool. All right. I'm not going to make it really complicated. I want you to think about this in the hero's journey way. I would love to put you in the Zoom rooms to work with each other, and I want you just to start and to try. You can write down the steps if you want. It's not going to be as complicated as you think. Step 1, safe place. Don't mind how you do it. Breathe, safe place. We've done it in the past session. So step 1, safe place, resource. You can connect that person to source, Joey, if you've done this. If you just want to connect them to the heart, if you want them to find a place in their imagination, safe place, relax the body, anchor there. I love an anchoring point, as you can put that safe place somewhere in the body. Because we're doing body work, put it somewhere. Just where the heart's normally good, but sometimes people's heart doesn't feel safe. So you also want to ask the person, where do you feel this safe place in your body? Go there. Because maybe they're like, my heart's been broken so many times. My safe place is in my ear. No one's found that place to hurt it yet, So people are fun. Safe place. Next step, we're going to use a thread. So say pull on a thread. You can ask the person what they want to work on. And they may actually go straight to a memory. They may literally say, I want to deal with my sexual abuse. If they actually bring up a memory from the past like that, say, okay, let's go there. Tell me about it. So they start telling you about it to access the emotion. That's all. Let them talk to access the emotion before the sensation. So it might look like, again, I'm making this up. I want to talk about the sexual abuse with my father. He raped me from the age of 4 to 7. Now I'm bringing up some of these harsh things because the second you start working with people in trauma, you will be, if you haven't done this before, blown away at how much rape, violence, and all of this stuff is normalized, and it's just everywhere. It's everywhere. So I'm using these ones because you might be with someone and have no idea, and you get in a session and they're like, we're talking about my rape. You're like, okay, it'll be the first thing you ever do. So let them start talking about it. If the person says, they don't go to a memory, they say, I want to talk about the repetitive fights I have with my partner now. That's a thread. So say, let's talk about that. So go into whatever they present with you. Maybe they'll say, I'll use me as an example. Okay, let's do the headaches. Cool, let's go into the headache. So you're using whatever they say to go towards that hyperarousal. Once the person starts talking, find the emotion. Find the emotion in the body, drop into the body. Now we're playing. That's where we got to get. So we get into the body. And have them drop into the body. And all I want you to do is to ask them about the sensation. And you can play this game. What does it remind you of? What does that sensation remind you of? They're talking about the sensation, but then they might link it to a memory. And they'll say, well, it reminds me of this. And then you go, okay, back into the sensation. And so you kind of dance between memory, sensation, going deeper, 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 deeper. And what you might find, you'll do this very naturally. Someone's like, oh, okay, so I want to talk about my headaches. And the person says, okay, I feel the pain in my head and it's tingly and it's hot. And then you say, okay, so does it remind you of anything? They're like, oh my God, I got hit in the head with a ball when I was a kid. I was at school and this ball just hit me in the head. I totally forgot and it broke my head, something like this. This is what can happen. And you go, okay, cool, let's go down to that moment. And now you're there and the person's like, oh my God, I can feel my head. I can feel the blood running down my eye. They totally forgot about the injury. And maybe that's connected to the headaches. So then you go there and then you go into the sensation. Can you feel that? Can you feel that? And the person starts to go, yeah, I can feel that. It's hot. It's hard. Oh, my ear is ringing. Oh, I can hear. And they start doing this stuff. And then you start to resource them. When they start to get to the point where it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. You say, okay, cool. Come back to your heart. Find that resource of yours. Okay. Find your resource. Find that source. Find source consciousness. Feel that all around you. Amazing. Now, go back to the sensation. Shit. Can you find a way to get out of it? Can you fight it? So there's a million different ways this is going to turn up. You're going to have to play. But the idea is you follow the sensation, memory, sensation, memory, sensation. And when you feel like they're starting to get into more of an anger, fear, it doesn't have to be anger and fear. It could just be fear. It could just be anger. Doesn't matter. Start to help them resource. How are you going to help them get their power back? That is all that we want to do here. Try and Play together, use your creativity, see what happens. We get to play in here. If you think that you're going to, some people get worried about this, that you're going to re-traumatize that person, just bring them back to their heart. Just move the energy. Just bring them back to their heart, resource them in their heart, and come back out, ask me. But as long as we move from hyper arousal back to the heart or the safe place and we move, you will not traumatize that person because you're moving. So you're just moving the energy. If you actually manage to get through the hyperarousal state and they fight and you help them leave the situation, take them back to their heart, let them find them the safe place, and you can start the reflection process if you want. But don't do that unless it feels right. Can we play? Can we give it a go? Got to start. So just give it a go. If you don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter. It's just this dance. I'll try and put
What did you mean with if they leave the place?
So if there's a memory, right? So if I, for instance, if I was a kid who had got hit in the head with a ball and it cracked open my skull, in that you may actually find that you go through the fear of it, you go through the anger of it, and you actually have to help yourself leave that memory. Like you help them leave the memory, find safety and leave the memory. For example, an accident like that, you might not need to fight somebody. You might not need to, but there's anger or there's fear. And the fear is meant to help you get to survival. So you help the person get to safety. You know, the fear is meant to help you survive and get to safety. So you help them get out of, they're stuck in this image. They're stuck. Complete the scene. Move them to the next scene of the movie. Will actually guide that person to create the next scene of the movie for themselves and life. Can we just try? And you can come back and give me your problems afterwards.
Can I ask a very quick question?
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is to avoid or get out of freeze response because the person wasn't in the moment able to go into fight or flight, right? So I just wanted to clarify that those are the healthy ways to get out of it. And freeze once you've gone into helplessness and couldn't. Yeah.
It's literally the reverse of the first diagram. So I'll show you this and then we're gonna get going. Can you see this?
Yeah.
So what I really love about what Peter Levine says, it's the same thing as the laws. How you go in is how you must come out. Mm-hmm. So the person, just going backwards to over here. Let's do this here. Person went in this way. Hyperarousal, adrenaline drops, fight, flight. Couldn't process, then they're going to go into one of these, anger, rage, terror, fear. Couldn't process, they move into helplessness. Now they're in freeze. So we want to reverse engineer that. You help them come back towards the freeze response by going towards that peak anxiety, and then you start to move them back through this. So the freeze response is going to be a feeling of helplessness. So maybe the person says, I feel helpless. I don't know what to do. The helpless is the freeze response. Helpless and freeze go together. We're trying to get to empowered. So then we've got to go back and actually access these energies of anger, fear, terror, whatever, to help the person regain their power. So you want to go backwards through those energies and then use those energies to fight out of the movement. So we just got to go backwards through this process. Now, exactly how they went in, you're not going to know until you're working with them, but they will let you know as they get closer, because they're going to say, I feel angry, or I feel scared, or I feel cold, or I feel whatever it is. And you've got to use that energy. So if they're more of like, terror, maybe they want to run, maybe they want to fight. Does this make sense? You got to go back and use that energy. So you got to use the anger, the rage, the terror, the fear to fight, flight out of the movement. Give it a go. It's somewhat like method acting. It's somewhat like personal transformation. It's the biggest hero's journey of all. So we are really method actors. Your characters, we're all characters, and some of us have just got stuck in our roles at certain places. In order to get to the next scene so we can create a different story, we've got to get through this scene. That's where we are. Patrick, that's a good way to say it to you. People are stuck in certain scenes. They've got to get out of certain scenes before they can go meet the shaman who takes them to quantum leaping world.